Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Taylor Richmond had heard dying men scream before. Fallujah, 2003, watching his squad pinned by insurgent fire. But Jesse Crawford's satellite call was different. The terror wasn't tactical, it was primal. "Taylor, I'm so hungry, I can't. The cold, why is it so cold?" Cracking sounds. Bone? Ice? The line went dead. That was 36 hours ago. And Taylor was still 5 miles from Jesse's last known coordinates, pushing through Glacier National Park's backcountry in conditions that made his Marine Corps training feel inadequate. Not because of the terrain, he'd humped worse mountains in Afghanistan, but because of the wrongness that had started at the trailhead and intensified with every mile. It was July 23rd, 2004. The temperature gauge on his Garmin eTrex Vista showed 79 degrees in the shade, but Taylor's breath misted in the air. He stopped, checking the thermometer clipped to his pack. Digital readout, 78 degrees. He held it at arm's length and watched his exhalation form visible clouds that dissipated slowly, as if the air resisted their dispersal. Taylor had worked as a wilderness ranger for Glacier National Park for 11 months, a deliberate choice after his discharge. The Corps had given him skills, land navigation, survival training, the ability to function under pressure. The Corps had also given him nightmares and a prescription for Zoloft he hadn't filled in 3 months. The mountains were supposed to be therapy. Clean problems with clear solutions. Lost hikers got found, injured climbers got evacuated, bears got hazed away from campgrounds. Nothing about Jesse Crawford's situation was clean. They'd worked together on a grisly relocation in June. Jesse was the park biologist. Taylor handled the tactical coordination. Professional relationship, minimal conversation. Jesse seemed solid, careful. The kind of guy who triple-checked his gear and filed detailed trip reports. Not the kind to vanish on a routine Wolfpack survey. The satellite phone call had come at 0342 hours on July 22nd, patched through to Taylor's ranger station because he was the only one certified for high-risk solo rescue operations. Protocol dictated he wait for backup, assemble a full SAR team, coordinate with the incident commander, but Jesse's voice, the raw terror, the impossible claim about cold in midsummer, the sounds of something breaking. Taylor had grabbed his pack and headed out at first light with only a radio notification to dispatch. Now, 5 miles into the Belly River drainage, Taylor was starting to question that decision. The forest was too quiet. No bird calls, no insect drone. Even the wind through the pines felt muffled, as if something was absorbing sound before it could travel. Taylor's boots crunched through pine needles with abnormal clarity, each step isolated and distinct. His Motorola XTS 5000 radio crackled. "Base to Richmond, what's your status?" Mile marker 4.8 following GPS waypoints from Crawford's last transmission. ETA to coordinates approximately 40 minutes. Taylor kept his voice neutral, professional. Ambient conditions, unusual. Possible localized weather anomaly. Define unusual. Taylor looked at the frost forming on the ferns beside the trail, despite the summer heat radiating from exposed rock. Temperature inconsistencies. Will report findings at Crawford's location. Richmond out. He didn't wait for acknowledgement. Didn't want to explain what he couldn't explain. The trail climbed through subalpine meadows where wildflowers should have been blooming. Indian paintbrush, alpine forget-me-nots, glacier lilies. Instead, the vegetation looked dormant, as if winter had come early to this specific drainage. Ice crystals clung to grass stems. A small creek that should have been running fast with snowmelt was partially frozen, clear ice-trapping bubbles mid-flow. Taylor's marine training had included cold weather operations, Arctic survival courses, acclimatization protocols. He understood hypothermia, recognized its stages, knew how environmental factors could create microclimates. But this wasn't a microclimate. This was a localized violation of thermodynamics. The GPS coordinates led him off trail, into dense lodgepole pine forest, where the silence became oppressive. No wind penetrated here. The air itself felt heavy, pressing against his eardrums with pressure that had nothing to do with altitude. He found Jesse's camp at 11:27 hours. The tent was collapsed under a layer of frost thick enough to obscure the fabric color. Rime ice-coated every surface: the camp stove, the bear canister, the aluminum cookpot. Taylor approached slowly, hand on the canister of bear spray at his belt, despite knowing instinctively that no bear had done this. The temperature here was Arctic. His breath formed dense clouds. The moisture in his nose froze with each inhalation. According to his thermometer, 76 degrees. According to his exposed skin, well below freezing. Taylor keyed his radio. "Base, this is Richmond. I've located Crawford's camp. Conditions are..." He stopped, searching for words that wouldn't sound insane. "Extremely anomalous. No sign of Crawford. Camp appears abandoned, but equipment is intact. Requesting immediate backup and possible thermal imaging from air support." Static hissed back at him, broken by fragments of words. "Can't, breaking up, say again." The radio died completely, display screen flickering once before going dark. Taylor checked the battery, full charge. He cycled the power. Nothing. From inside the frozen tent came a sound. Breathing. Slow. Wet. Hungry. Every combat instinct Taylor possessed screamed at him to retreat, establish a perimeter, call for backup. But backup wasn't coming. The radio was dead, and Jesse Crawford might be dying inside that tent. Taylor drew his Benchmade folding knife. Inadequate, he knew, against whatever could freeze a campsite in July, but the weight of it in his hand was familiar. Comforting. He unzipped the tent. The smell hit him first. Copper and decay and something else. Something sweet and wrong that reminded him of the mass graves outside Fallujah, where bodies had cooked in the sun for days. Taylor's stomach clenched, but he'd smelled worse. He'd walked through worse. The tent interior was empty except for Jesse's sleeping bag, shredded. Not torn. Shredded, as if something with claws had methodically destroyed it from the inside out. Frozen blood crusted the fabric, brown-black in the dim light. On the tent floor, Jesse's field journal, pages spread open to the most recent entry. The handwriting deteriorated from Jesse's usual neat print to frantic scrawl. Day 21. Can't stop thinking about food. Dreams about meat. Raw meat. The wolf pack I'm tracking killed an elk 2 days ago. Found the carcass, most of it was still there. I was so hungry. Just a bite. Just to stop the cramping. God forgive me. Just one bite. The entry was dated July 3rd, 3 weeks ago. Taylor's hands trembled as he turned the page, not from cold, though the temperature in the tent felt like a walk-in freezer. This was fear, primal and chemical, flooding his system with adrenaline. Next entry, dated July 10th. The hunger doesn't stop. Everything I eat tastes like ash. I catch myself staring at my own hands, wondering about the muscle underneath. This isn't right. Something is wrong with me. I need to hike out, but every time I try to leave, I end up back at the elk carcass. There's something in the forest, I hear it at night. Sounds like my voice, but I'm not speaking. It knows my thoughts. It knows what I did. July 17th. It won't let me leave. I've tried hiking out 6 times. The trail loops back. My GPS shows me walking in straight lines, but I always end up here. The thing in the forest is closer now. I can see it in the trees. Tall. Too tall. Antlers or branches. When it moves, the air gets cold. When it speaks, it sounds like me. It says I invited it. That eating dead flesh raw in desperation. That opened the door. Algonquian legends. Wendigo. I thought they were just stories the old Blackfeet guides told. But it's real. God help me, it's real and it's hungry. The final entry was yesterday's date, written in letters so shaky Taylor could barely read them. I can feel my body changing, bones elongating, teeth loose in my jaw. The hunger is everything now. Taylor, if you find this, don't eat. Don't let the hunger make you do what I did. It waits for that. It waits for the moment when survival instinct overrides taboo. And then it comes. And then it takes you. And the worst part, the absolute worst, is that I'm not scared anymore. I'm just so hungry. And you smell delicious. Taylor dropped the journal, scrambling backward out of the tent. His breath came in harsh gasps that crystallized immediately. The forest around him was utterly silent, waiting. Then came the voice, Jesse's voice, from somewhere in the trees. Taylor, thank God, I'm hurt, I can't move, please, I'm so cold. Every tactical bone in Taylor's body recognized this as wrong. Jesse's journal made it clear. Whatever was out here could mimic, could deceive, but the voice sounded so genuinely pained, so desperate. Jesse? Taylor called out, scanning the tree line. Where are you? North of camp. Maybe 100 yards. Fell into a ravine. Please hurry. Taylor checked his compass. North led deeper into the backcountry, away from the trail, away from any chance of support. Classic ambush setup. He'd seen insurgents use similar tactics, fake casualty calls to draw Marines into kill zones. But this was different. This was Glacier National Park, not Iraq. This was his colleague, possibly injured, possibly dying. Taylor made his decision. He pulled out his own satellite phone, older model Iridium 9505A, reliable in ways cell phones could never be in the backcountry. He keyed in a message to Park Dispatch. Crawford situation deteriorating. Possible medical emergency, plus environmental hazard. Coordinates 48.9547 degree N, 113.6892 .dgw. If no contact in 2 hours, initiate full SAR with medical evac. He hit send. The phone's display showed, searching for satellites. The progress bar filled. Stopped. Reset. The message wouldn't transmit. From the north, Jesse's voice again. Taylor, please, it's coming back. The cold thing. It's coming back and I can't run. Taylor secured his pack, checked his gear. Benchmade knife, bear spray, headlamp, first aid kit, emergency beacon. Not enough. Nowhere near enough for what Jesse's journal described. But Marines didn't leave men behind. That was the code that mattered when everything else failed. He moved north, following the voice. The forest grew denser. Lodgepole pines packed so tight their lower branches interlaced into barriers. Taylor pushed through, pine needles scraping his face, resin sticking to his hands. The temperature dropped further with each step. His joints ached with a cold that seemed to bypass clothing, bypass skin, settle directly into marrow. After 50 yards, he emerged into a clearing. The clearing shouldn't exist. It wasn't on any of his topo maps. But here it was. A perfect circle of barren ground, maybe 60 feet across, ringed by dead trees that stood like sentinels. In the center, bones. Not a skeleton, bones. Hundreds of them arranged in patterns that suggested intelligence but not humanity. Elk bones, deer bones, smaller fragments that might have been rabbit or marmot. And in the very center, still wearing shredded NPS uniform, Jesse Crawford, or what remained of him. The body was wrong in ways Taylor's combat experience struggled to categorize. Jesse had been a solid 180 pounds, 5'10" athletic build. This thing was gaunt to the point of emaciation, stretched somehow, limbs elongated and joints reversed. The skin had a blue-gray pallor, pulled tight over bones that jutted at angles human anatomy didn't permit. But the worst part was that it was breathing, chest rising and falling with wet, rattling sounds, eyes open, not Jesse's brown eyes, but something yellow-white, like old bone. Taylor. The voice came from the corpse's mouth, perfect mimicry of Jesse's warm baritone. Help me. Please. It hurts so much. Taylor's hand found the bear spray, finger on the trigger. Jesse's dead. Not dead. The thing sat up, vertebrae cracking like gunshots. Changing, hungry. So hungry. Do you know what hunger feels like, Taylor? Real hunger? When your body starts consuming itself? When you do anything, for just one bite of meat, It stood, and Taylor's mind finally registered the true horror. This thing was at least 7 feet tall, maybe 8, limbs too long and bent backward at the knees, hands that ended in claws made of yellowed bone, broken through the fingertips like a second set of teeth. The Wendigo, not possessing Jesse, not wearing him like a suit. Jesse had become it, transformed by whatever taboo he'd broken when he ate raw carrion in desperation. The folklore was real. The warning passed down through Blackfeet and Cree generations was literal truth. "I'm sorry," the Wendigo said with Jesse's voice, and for a moment Taylor heard genuine regret. "I tried to fight it. For weeks I tried. But the hunger, it's not a craving, Taylor. It's a command. It's the only thought. And you smell." It inhaled, ribs expanding grotesquely, like salvation. Taylor triggered the bear spray. The capsaicin foam shot out in a wide cone, catching the Wendigo directly in the face. In Quantico, instructors had told him bear spray was effective against any biological threat. They'd never mentioned what to do when the threat didn't have biology in any conventional sense. The Wendigo didn't even flinch. It walked through the spray cloud, each step accompanied by the crack of frozen ground beneath its feet. The air around it crystallized, moisture condensing into ice particles that swirled like a localized blizzard. Taylor ran. Marine Corps training emphasized tactical withdrawal, establishing fallback positions, maintaining situational awareness. Taylor did none of that. He crashed through the forest in pure flight response, branches whipping his face, roots catching his boots, lungs burning as he gulped air so cold it felt like inhaling glass shards. Behind him, the sound of pursuit. Not footsteps exactly, but the crack and splinter of trees being pushed aside, the frozen crunch of vegetation dying in the Wendigo's wake. And Jesse's voice, echoing through the forest. "Don't run, Taylor. You'll only tire yourself out. Make yourself tender. I want you fresh." Taylor's rational mind, the part trained to analyze tactical situations, calculate odds, form strategies, was screaming that this was impossible. That creatures from Algonquian legend didn't hunt park rangers in 21st century Montana. That his colleague hadn't transformed into a cannibalistic spirit. That temperature didn't drop 40 degrees in localized areas for no reason. But his body knew truth when it felt it. The genuine article terror that came from being prey. He emerged onto a game trail and followed it east, trying to navigate back toward the main hiking corridor where other rangers might be searching. His GPS was useless. The screen showed his position flickering across impossible distances, latitude and longitude numbers scrolling randomly. The Wendigo's voice came from directly ahead. "You can't outrun winter, Taylor. You can't outrun hunger." Taylor skidded to a stop, changed direction, crashed through underbrush to the south. The compass on his watch spun uselessly. Every direction felt like north, like he was running deeper into territory that belonged to something older than parks and trails and human jurisdiction. He broke through a stand of alders and found himself back in the clearing with the bones. Impossible. He'd run for 15 minutes, covered at least a mile. But here he was. Same dead trees, same circular pattern, same arrangement of skeletons. The Wendigo stood waiting, head tilted in curiosity that was almost canine. The forest belongs to the hunger now. All paths lead back, all trails circle. There's nowhere to go, Taylor. There's only the choice, fight or feed. Taylor's hand dropped to his knife. 6-inch blade, 154 cm steel, razor sharp. He'd used it to field dress deer, cut rope, prepare kindling. Against a creature that stood 8 feet tall with claws made of bone and breath that froze moisture in the air, it was a toothpick. But it was what he had. "Jesse's still in there," Taylor said, forcing his voice steady. "I know he is. Fight it." The Wendigo laughed, a sound like ice cracking on a frozen lake. "Jesse is the hunger now. Jesse is bones and need and the understanding that everything else, morality, friendship, duty, is just noise." Do you know what he thought about while he was changing? He thought about you, about how we worked together on the grisly relocation, about how you'd probably come looking for him, about how you'd be lean, fit, how your muscles would be stringy from all that hiking, how your liver would be... Shut up. Taylor's hand tightened on the knife. He fought it for 3 weeks. Wrote those journal entries begging for help, begging for someone to stop him. But deep down he was hoping you'd come, hoping you'd walk right into the trap. The Wendigo moved closer, each step leaving frost patterns in the dirt. The hunger makes you honest, Taylor. Strips away all the lies we tell ourselves about civilization and humanity. Reveals the truth. We're just meat that learned to lie about being meat. Taylor's mind raced through options. Radio dead, satellite phone inoperative, GPS scrambled, no backup coming, no extraction possible. Just him, a knife and a creature that had once been his colleague. The Marine Corps had taught him that sometimes there was no good tactical option. Sometimes you just had to embrace the suck and execute, Taylor charged. Not toward the Wendigo, toward the edge of the clearing, toward the tree line where the dead sentinel stood. If he could reach denser forest, maybe create obstacles, maybe... The Wendigo moved with speed that shouldn't be possible for something so emaciated. One moment it was 20 feet away. The next it was in front of Taylor, clawed hand closing around his throat and lifting him off his feet. The cold was immediate and total, not just skin-level cold but cellular. The kind of cold that stopped metabolic processes, that turned water in tissue to ice crystals. Taylor felt his throat constricting, felt his body temperature plummeting, felt consciousness starting to gray out. The Wendigo pulled him close, yellow bone eyes examining him with predatory focus. You smell like Fallujah, like burning oil and fear, like the men you watched die. Jesse's voice, intimate and terrible. I can taste your memories in the air. Does it haunt you? Watching your squad bleed out while you were pinned down? Unable to help? Unable to save them? Taylor's vision tunneled, darkness creeping in from the edges. His fingers scrabbled uselessly against the Wendigo's wrist. Bone hard, frost-covered, immovable. That's your hunger, the Wendigo whispered. Not for food. For redemption, for a chance to save someone, to prove you're not the coward who hid behind cover while better men died. It brought Taylor closer, mouth opening to reveal teeth that had elongated into fangs. But you can't save anyone, not them, not me, not yourself. Taylor's hand found the knife at his belt, drew it, drove it upward with the last of his strength, aiming for where Jesse's heart should be. The blade sank in up to the hilt. The Wendigo didn't even flinch. It looked down at the knife buried in its chest, then back at Taylor. This body doesn't need a heart anymore. It needs hunger, and you've just made yourself bleed. Taylor felt the warmth spreading down his arm, his own blood from where the knife handle had cut his palm. The Wendigo's nostrils flared. Oh, it breathed. Oh, that's beautiful. It dropped him. Taylor hit the ground hard, gasping for air, scrambling backward. The Wendigo stood over him, plucked the knife from its chest like removing a splinter. No blood came from the wound. Instead, frost crystals, forming a layer of ice across torn flesh. I wanted to make this quick, the Wendigo said, advancing. But you've been so entertaining. Maybe I'll let the hunger take you slowly. Maybe I'll let you feel what Jesse felt. The transformation, the elongation, the understanding that you're becoming something that only feeds and never fills. Taylor's back hit a tree, nowhere left to run, nowhere to hide. He looked up at the thing that had been Jesse Crawford, at the monument to what happened when survival instinct overrode the one taboo that kept humans human. And he understood, with perfect clarity, what he had to do. The Wendigo was created by cannibalism, by the act of consuming human flesh, whether from desperation or choice. It was sustained by that hunger, by the violation of the deepest taboo, which meant there was one way to end it. Taylor had to let it feed. Do it, he said, voice steady despite the terror that threatened to fracture every syllable. Finish it. The Wendigo paused, head tilting. What? You said it yourself. You're Jesse and the hunger both, which means part of you is still in there, still fighting, still hating what you've become. Taylor forced himself to meet those bone-yellow eyes. Feed, satisfy the hunger, and maybe, Jesse can come back. That's not... The Wendigo's voice cracked, and for just a moment Taylor heard genuine Jesse. Confused, terrified, desperate. Then the hunger reasserted itself. "You don't know what you're offering." "I know exactly what I'm offering." Taylor thought about his squad in Fallujah, about the men he couldn't save, about every night since when he woke up hearing their screams. "I know what it means to fail people, to watch them die because you weren't good enough, fast enough, brave enough. Maybe this is how I fix that. Maybe this is the one person I can actually save." The Wendigo stared at him for a long moment. Then it lunged. Pain, white hot despite the impossible cold, as teeth sank into Taylor's shoulder. He screamed, a sound that echoed through the silent forest and came back to him distorted, multiplied, wrong. The Wendigo fed with desperate hunger, each bite accompanied by cracking sounds as its jaw unhinged to accommodate flesh and bone. Taylor felt his consciousness fragmenting, splitting into pieces that couldn't quite connect. His vision swam, his hearing filled with static. And then, the feeding stopped. Taylor opened eyes he didn't remember closing. The Wendigo crouched over him, mouth stained with blood, body trembling. As Taylor watched, something changed in its posture. The two long limbs contracted slightly. The yellowed eyes flickered, brown showing through for just a second. "Taylor?" Jesse's voice, but clearer now, more human. "What have you done?" "Gave you what you needed." Taylor's words slurred. Blood loss, shock, hypothermia, all the things his Marine training had taught him to recognize, now happening to him. Fed the hunger. Now, fight it. Jesse's face, still distorted, still wrong but recognizably Jesse, twisted in agony. "It's not that simple. The hunger doesn't stop. It never stops. All I did is buy myself maybe an hour before." He looked at his clawed hands, at Taylor's blood coating them. Oh God, what did I do?" "Exactly what I let you do." Taylor's breathing was shallow now, each inhale bringing less oxygen. "Now finish it. End me. End yourself. Don't let anyone else." Jesse sobbed, a horrible sound coming from a throat that wasn't quite human anymore. "I can't. Taylor, I can't. I'm so sorry. For all of it. For eating that elk. For not hiking out when I still could. For... Not your fault." Taylor's vision was graying out again, but this time it felt almost peaceful. Survival instinct. Can't blame yourself for wanting to live. But I didn't just want to live. Jesse's claws retracted slightly, bone sliding back under skin that was starting to look less corpse-like. The hunger, it showed me the truth. I wanted to die. Had wanted to for months. Job stress, relationship ended, felt like I was just going through motions, and when I ate that carrion, part of me knew what it would do. Part of me wanted the transformation, wanted to become something that didn't have to care anymore. Taylor tried to respond, but couldn't find the breath. His heartbeat was slowing, irregular rhythm fading towards silence. Jesse cradled him with hands that were looking more human by the second, the Wendigo transformation reversing as it fed on actual flesh instead of its own endless need. "You saved me, but I can't save you back. Don't need saving." Taylor managed a smile, tasting copper. "Just need you to hike out. Tell them, environmental hazard. Close this sector. Don't let anyone else." "I'll tell them." Jesse's voice was almost normal now, the inhuman resonance fading. "I'll tell them everything. About what I became. About what you did. About..." But Taylor didn't hear the rest. The cold had stopped feeling cold. The pain had stopped feeling like anything. He was back in Fallujah watching his squad. But this time it was okay because he'd finally done something right. Finally saved someone. The last thing he saw was Jesse's face, fully human again, tears freezing on cheeks that were no longer blue-gray but living flesh, before everything went quiet. Jesse Crawford walked out of Glacier National Park's backcountry on July 25, 2004, carrying Taylor Richmond's body. The transformation had reversed completely over the 12 hours following Taylor's sacrifice, the Wendigo curse broken by the voluntary nature of the feeding. He told the truth, all of it. They didn't believe him, of course. The official report listed Taylor's death as animal attack, species undetermined, and Jesse's survival as combination of hypothermia-induced delusion and severe PTSD. Jesse was placed on administrative leave, referred to psychiatric evaluation, and eventually resigned from the National Park Service. But he'd kept his promise to Taylor. The sector where Taylor died was designated Environmental Research Area, no public access, based on Jesse's testimony about localized temperature anomalies and dangerous wildlife activity. Rangers avoided it. Hikers were turned back. The bones in the clearing remained, a monument to hunger and sacrifice that nobody visited. Jesse moved to Browning, Montana, to the Blackfeet Reservation where his grandmother had been born. The elders there knew about the Wendigo. They'd always known. They listened to his story without judgment and taught him the ceremonies meant to keep the hunger at bay. Not just physical hunger, but the spiritual kind that had nearly destroyed him. Every year on July 23rd, Jesse returned to the closed sector, alone, breaking NPS regulations, risking arrest. He would stand at the clearing's edge and speak to Taylor's memory, to the man who'd understood that sometimes the only way to save someone was to become what they needed to consume. The temperature never dropped unnaturally again. The forest returned to normal. No more hikers vanished on new moons. Whatever dark bargain the Wendigo represented, Taylor's sacrifice had fulfilled it, but Jesse never forgot the lesson written in blood and frost. That survival instinct, pushed to extremes, could transform humans into monsters. That the line between living and feeding was thinner than anyone wanted to believe. And that redemption sometimes required accepting damnation from someone brave enough to offer it. He carried that knowledge like Taylor had carried memories of Fallujah, a weight that never lightened, a debt that could never be repaid, a wound that wouldn't heal but could be honored. In the end, Taylor Richmond had saved his colleague, not from death. Death had been inevitable the moment Jesse broke the taboo, but from an eternity of hunger, from the curse of becoming a predator that could never be satisfied. That was worth dying for. That was worth remembering. I hope you felt the terror. If you enjoyed this literary horror, please consider following. Which moment scared you the most? What's your theory about Taylor's final choice? Nathan Cole had learned to ignore the whispers. 5 years as a ranger in Redwood National Park had taught him that the ancient groves spoke in frequencies most people couldn't hear. Wind through cathedral branches, sap moving beneath bark older than nations, roots communicating through fungal networks in languages that predated human consciousness. His supervisor called it pattern recognition. His ex-therapist had called it mild auditory hallucinations brought on by isolation. Nathan called it Tuesday. But when Lucas Grant's Garmin inReach beacon went dark in the Ladybird Johnson Grove, the whispers changed. They weren't background noise anymore. They were saying his name, in voices that sounded like wood splitting under pressure, and they were coming from trees that Nathan knew with sickening certainty had moved 40 feet since his last patrol. "Cole, you copy?" The Motorola XPR 7550 crackled with dispatch's voice. "We've got a confirmed distress activation. Botanist solo hiker beacon went active at 1447 and transmitted for 6 minutes before going dark. Last known coordinates put him in the grove near Hyperion Zone." Nathan checked his Garmin Montana 680. The coordinates placed Lucas Grant within 200 yards of the restricted area surrounding Hyperion, at 380.3 feet, the tallest known tree on Earth. A tree whose exact location the Park Service kept classified to prevent tourist damage. A tree Nathan had stood beneath exactly once 3 years ago, and sworn he'd never approach again because the whispers there didn't sound like wind at all. "Copy that. I'm 40 minutes out. Any medical details on the hiker?" "Negative. Just the automatic SOS from his device. Could be injury, could be equipment malfunction, standard hasty search protocols." Nathan signed off and started hiking. The afternoon light filtered through the canopy in shafts that seemed too precisely angled, too deliberately placed to illuminate his path. Around him, the coastal redwoods rose like pillars holding up the sky. Sequoia sempervirens, some of them 2,000 years old. Their bark thick enough to survive wildfires that would consume entire forests. He'd memorized their scientific names during ranger training, had studied their growth patterns and symbiotic relationships, had learned everything the textbooks could teach about these giants. The textbooks hadn't mentioned that they watched you. Nathan felt it now. The sensation he'd spent 5 years pretending wasn't real. Awareness pressing against his consciousness like fingers testing a locked door. The trees knew he was here. More than that, they were interested, curious, and something about Lucas Grant's distress signal had changed their usual benign indifference into something that made Nathan's hindbrain scream warnings his rational mind refused to acknowledge. He passed a western hemlock he'd marked 2 months ago for a biodiversity study. The orange survey tape was still tied around its trunk, but the tree stood on the wrong side of the trail. Nathan stopped, pulled out his field notebook, checked his notes. The hemlock should be east of the trail, not west. Trees didn't migrate. Trees didn't move. Except the whispers were louder now, and they were laughing. Nathan keyed his radio. "Dispatch, Cole. I'm at mile marker 7 on the Lady Bird Johnson Trail. Something's off with the landmarks. GPS shows I'm on course, but visual markers don't match my previous surveys." Static. Then, "Copy, Cole. Probably just disorientation. The groves all look similar. Trust your GPS." Trust your GPS. Right, because a satellite navigation system understood these woods better than someone who'd hiked them weekly for 5 years. Nathan checked the Garmin again. Coordinates matched, elevation matched. Everything matched except the forest itself, which had rearranged itself like furniture in a room he thought he knew. The whispers resolved into something almost like words. Not English. Something older. Consonants that clicked like beetle mandibles. Vowels drawn out like wind through hollow wood. Nathan had heard fragments before, usually dismissed them as auditory pareidolia, his brain finding patterns in random noise. But this was structured, intentional. Language. He reached Lucas Grant's last known position at 1623, just as the afternoon shadows began pooling between the trees like dark water. No sign of the botanist. No torn fabric on branches, no disturbed ground. No indication anyone had been here except a Garmin InReach Mini lying on a bed of redwood sorrel, its screen cracked, battery dead despite the solar panel that should have kept it charged. Nathan bagged the device and did a quick circle search. Standard SAR protocol. Start at the point last seen, expand in concentric circles, look for clues. He found Lucas's backpack 30 yards north, contents scattered. Nikon D850 with a cracked lens. Field journal soaked through despite no rain in 3 weeks. Water bottles still full. Emergency beacon torn from its mount. And pressed into the damp earth around the backpack, footprints. They started human-sized. Boot treads, probably Morel Moabs based on the pattern, size 11 or 12. But 20 feet from the backpack, the prints changed. Same gait, same stride length. But the impressions deepened and widened as if whatever made them had gained 200 pounds of mass mid-step. And the tread pattern shifted into something that looked less like boot rubber and more like bark. Nathan's hands trembled as he photographed the prints with his iPhone X. The whispers crescendoed into something that might have been singing. Multiple voices in harmony, rising and falling in patterns that made his teeth ache and his vision swim. He recognized the melody, impossibly. Not from any song he'd heard, but from something deeper, more fundamental. The rhythm of growth, the patience of centuries, the slow consciousness of organisms that measured time in rings beneath bark. Dispatch, Cole. I found evidence at the scene. Hikers' equipment abandoned, signs of unusual activity. Requesting backup and search dog team. More static than there should be. Then dispatch's voice, distant and distorted. Negative on the dogs, Cole. Weather's moving in, we're pulling all units back to staging. Complete your hasty search and return to base. Nathan looked up. The sky between the canopies showed clear blue, not a cloud visible. Dispatch, I'm not seeing any weather. Skies are clear. Cole, we're showing a major front on radar. Return to base. That's an order. The radio went dead. Nathan tried 3 more times to raise dispatch but got only static that resolved, just for a moment, into that clicking, vowel-heavy language. He was alone. 40 minutes from the trailhead in a forest that was rearranging itself, with a missing botanist whose footprints turned into something impossible. Lucas Grant's field journal lay open to the last entry, dated today. The handwriting started neat, precise, scientific. Day 14. Located Hyperion via triangulation from known reference points. Tree shows unusual growth patterns in upper crown. Possible evidence of trauma healing from 1960s logging era. More significantly, discovered what appears to be carved symbols on north-facing trunk at 40-foot elevation. Not Native American, possibly Cyrillic, Eastern European. We'll climb tomorrow for documentation and samples. The entry continued, but the handwriting deteriorated into frantic scrawling. It's not a carving, it's growing. The symbols are part of the bark, part of the wood itself. They're moving. I can hear. The rest was illegible. Letters overlapping into chaotic spirals. Nathan's radio crackled. Nathan Cole. Not dispatch's voice. Not any voice that should come from a Motorola radio. Deep, resonant, multi-tonal like wind through pipe organs. Nathan Cole, who hears the forest speak. He should run. Every rational instinct said, run. Get to the trailhead. Get help. Don't engage with auditory hallucinations manifesting through electronic equipment. But 5 years of ignoring the whispers had taught him something. They got louder when you ran. They followed. And whatever was speaking his name through the radio already knew exactly where he stood. Who are you? Nathan asked the air, feeling insane. The trees around him creaked. Not from wind. The air was perfectly still. They creaked like joints flexing, like muscles awakening after long sleep. And the bark on the nearest redwood rippled, fibers rearranging themselves into a face 10 feet tall. Eyes like knotholes, mouth a vertical split in the trunk, features both human and utterly alien. I am Leshy. The voice came from everywhere. The trees, the earth, the air itself. Guardian of old growth, lord of ancient wood. Your kind gave me many names when you remembered me, when you feared to cut the deep forests. Nathan's training kicked in even as his mind gibbered in panic. Establish communication. Assess threat level. I'm a park ranger. I'm looking for a missing person. Lucas Grant. Have you seen him? The face in the bark smiled. It was not a comforting expression. I have absorbed him. The one who climbed Hyperion without permission. Who sought to catalog what should remain secret. Who carved instruments into her bark to measure her age, as if years mattered to what has grown since your species learned to walk upright. Absorbed. Not killed. Not captured. Absorbed. Nathan thought of the footprints that changed from boot to bark. Where is he? He is here. He is there. He is becoming. The face gestured, a branch extending, pointing deeper into the grove. He is learning what it means to be rooted, to measure time in seasons, not heartbeats, to exist in communion with the forest that sustains all life in this place. Nathan could see them now, once he knew to look. Human shapes pressed against tree trunks, their features barely distinguishable from the bark. Not carved, not attached, part of. Bodies that had merged with the wood, faces frozen in expressions somewhere between agony and transcendence. How many hikers had disappeared in these groves over the decades? How many had the search teams never found? You're killing people, Nathan said. I am transforming them, offering them permanence, freedom from the terror of linear time, of consciousness trapped in fragile flesh. The Leshy's face rippled, reconfiguring. But you, Nathan Cole, you are different. You hear us, have always heard us. The gift your kind calls madness. The whispers surrounded him now, a choir of voices speaking in harmonics that shouldn't exist in nature. Nathan pressed his hands against his ears, but it made no difference. The sounds came from inside his skull, bypassing his eardrums entirely. "I'm not mad," he said. "It's just pattern recognition, neural processing of ambient environmental stimuli." The Leshy laughed. Every tree in the grove shook with it. "The words you use to deny what you are, what you have always been, sensitive, connected, capable of perceiving what your species has forgotten in their rush toward concrete and steel." Nathan's phone buzzed. Text message from dispatch. "Weather deteriorating. All units RTB immediately." He looked up again. Still clear sky. Still no weather. His phone buzzed again. Same message. Then again. Again. The screen filled with identical texts, hundreds of them. The phone's memory warning flashing as gigabytes of redundant data flooded the device. "Your tools betray you," the Leshy said. "GPS tells you where you are but cannot tell you where the forest wants you to be. Radio connects you to distant voices while making you deaf to the ones that surround you. These ancient ones," the face gestured to the towering redwoods, "they predate your satellites by millennia. They know paths that your maps will never show." Nathan checked his Garmin. The coordinates had changed. According to the device, he'd moved 3 miles north in the last 10 seconds without taking a step. The topographic map showed terrain features that didn't match his position, valleys where there should be ridges, streams where the ground lay dry. "What do you want?" Nathan asked. "Want? I want nothing. I am." But Lucas Grant trespassed upon sacred ground, drove metal into living wood, sought to reduce mystery to mere data. For this, he becomes part of what he sought to measure. And you, Nathan Cole, you who have spent 5 years denying your gift, you will witness, you will understand, and you will choose. Choose what? Whether to remain separate, isolated, trapped in the prison of individual consciousness, or to join the communion, to become part of the oldest living network on this continent, to trade the brief candle of human awareness for the slow, eternal existence of ancient growth. The trees around Nathan began to move, not swaying, moving, their roots pulling free from soil with sounds like tearing flesh, their trunks bending in directions that defied structural biomechanics. They formed a corridor, a pathway leading deeper into the grove, toward the restricted zone where Hyperion stood. Nathan's legs carried him forward without conscious decision. Part of him screamed to resist, to run, to do anything except walk calmly toward whatever waited in that ancient heart of the forest. But the whispers had become a roar, and the roar had become the only truth he could perceive. This was what he'd been avoiding for 5 years. This was why he'd convinced himself the voices were hallucinations, why he'd taken the ranger position in the first place, trying to normalize the abnormal to transform the supernatural into the scientific. The pathway ended at Hyperion. She rose 380, 3 feet into the California sky, her crown lost in the canopy layer where light and shadow became indistinguishable. And wrapped around her trunk at 40-foot intervals, growing from the bark rather than carved into it, were symbols that Nathan's rational mind insisted were Cyrillic, but his deeper awareness recognized as far older. Pre-Cyrillic, pre-alphabetic. The first language, spoken by the first consciousness that was not human. Lucas Grant hung suspended in Hyperion's branches at the 100-foot mark. Not dead. Nathan could see him breathing, could see his chest rising and falling in rhythm with the wind moving through the canopy. But his skin had taken on a reddish-brown tint, and when he opened his eyes, they were the deep gold brown of old-growth heartwood. "Nathan," Lucas said, his voice rustling like leaves. "I can see everything now. Every mycelial connection, every nutrient transfer, every chemical signal passing between roots. Do you know what the forest is? Not a collection of individual trees. It's a single organism with consciousness distributed across thousands of nodes. And I'm part of it." The Leshy emerged from Hyperion's trunk, its form more defined now. Humanoid but 12 feet tall, covered in moss and lichen, its face simultaneously ancient and newborn, eyes that held the patient cruelty of geological time. He climbed seeking knowledge, the Leshy said, and knowledge was granted. He understands now what it means to exist in true communion. No isolation, no fear, no death, merely transformation, Reorganization, return to the soil that births all life. Nathan's gift, the sensitivity he'd denied and medicated and rationalized, opened fully. He felt what Lucas described, the vast underground network connecting every tree in the grove, mycelium-forming synapses across miles of forest floor, chemical signals encoding information more complex than human language. The forest was conscious, had always been conscious, and it was aware of him with the focused intensity of a predator that had finally cornered elusive prey. "You feel it," the Leshy said. "The truth that terrifies your kind. You are not separate from nature. You never were. The boundary between self and other is illusion, convenient fiction to help fragile egos maintain coherence." Nathan's phone died. His radio died. His Garmin screen went black. Every piece of technology that connected him to the human world failed simultaneously, leaving him alone with the forest's consciousness pressing against his mind like ocean pressure at depth. "I won't," Nathan said. "Whatever you're offering, I refuse." "Refuse? You think you have a choice?" The Leshy moved closer, and Nathan smelled earth and decay and the green growing scent of life consuming death consuming life. "Your sensitivity makes you vulnerable. Every moment you've spent in these woods has opened you further to our influence. You cannot unhear what you've heard, cannot unfeel what you've felt." Lucas laughed from his perch in Hyperion's branches. "It's beautiful, Nathan. No more anxiety, no more isolation. No more lying awake at night wondering if you're insane because you hear voices in the wind. Here the voices are real, and they welcome you." Nathan's hands trembled. He thought about the last 5 years, the medications that didn't work, the therapy sessions where he'd lied about the severity of his experiences, the constant exhaustion of pretending to be normal when normal meant being deaf to frequencies he couldn't ignore. How much easier would it be to just let go, to stop fighting, to accept what the forest offered? "No," he said again. The Leshy's expression shifted to something that might have been disappointment. "Then you will watch what happens to those who refuse, who cling to separation, who deny the communion." The ground beneath Nathan's feet erupted. Roots burst from the soil, wrapping around his ankles, his calves, climbing his legs, with the inexorable strength of growth. He tried to pull free, but they tightened, drawing him down, pulling him toward the earth. The whispers became screams, thousands of voices crying out in a language older than words, demanding, commanding, insisting he surrender. Nathan felt his skin begin to change, roughening, hardening, chlorophyll seeping into his cells, his blood turning to sap. He could feel the forest trying to absorb him, to transform consciousness into something distributed across root networks and mycorrhizal fungi. It would be so easy. Just stop resisting. Just accept. I said no. The word erupted from Nathan with force that surprised him. Not just his voice, something deeper, older, a refusal that came from whatever part of his psyche had been sensitive to the forest in the first place. The gift wasn't just receiving, it was also transmitting. The roots hesitated. For just a moment, their grip loosened. Nathan understood then. His sensitivity had always been two-way communication. He'd spent 5 years listening, never realizing he could also speak, could project, could impose his will on the consciousness pressing against his own. He thought of fire, of chainsaws, of the parking lots and visitor centers humans had carved from ancient groves, of the 1,000 ways his species had demonstrated mastery over nature through violence and transformation. The Leshy recoiled. "You think consciousness makes you special?" Nathan said, his voice steady despite the terror coursing through him. "You think communion excuses what you're doing? You're a predator, ancient, powerful, but still just a predator. And I'm a ranger in a federal park, which means I have authority here." He pulled his emergency flare gun from his belt. Standard equipment for SAR operations, meant for signaling. 3 phosphorus flares, each burning at 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Redwood bark was fire-resistant, had evolved to survive wildfires. But at the base of living wood, where bark met root, vulnerability remained. Nathan aimed at the exposed roots wrapping around Hyperion's base. "Release Lucas Grant, or I start burning." The Leshy's face contorted with rage. "You would not dare. Hyperion is irreplaceable. The oldest verified living. I know exactly what she is, which is why you're going to let him go. Now." Silence. The whispers stopped. The entire forest held its breath. Then slowly the roots around Nathan's legs withdrew. Lucas Grant descended from the branches, lowered by vines that released him gently to the forest floor. His skin retained its bark-like texture, his eyes their golden color, but he breathed human breaths and spoke human words. "Nathan, what are you?" "We're leaving, both of us. Now." The Leshy moved to block their path. Nathan raised the flare gun. "I am eternal," the Leshy said. "I have stood in these groves since before your ancestors learned agriculture. You cannot threaten." Nathan fired. The phosphorus flare struck deadwood 20 feet from Hyperion's trunk and ignited with chemical fury. The Leshy shrieked, a sound like every tree in the forest screaming simultaneously. Within seconds, Nathan's radio crackled back to life. "All units, we have a fire report in Lady Bird Johnson Grove. Cole, what's your status?" Nathan grabbed Lucas and ran. Behind them, he heard the Leshy calling out in that ancient language, heard the forest rearranging itself to block their escape. But fire changes everything. Fire is transformation the forest fears. And Nathan's flare had given them exactly enough distraction to reach the trail. They made it to the trailhead at 1937, stumbling into the parking lot where 3 ranger vehicles and an ambulance waited. Lucas Grant was immediately surrounded by medical personnel, Nathan by supervisors demanding explanations for the unauthorized fire. He gave them facts, located the missing hiker, encountered unstable conditions, deployed flare for signaling, resultant fire contained to deadfall and suppressed by incoming fog. All true. None of it approaching the truth. They airlifted Lucas to Redwood Memorial Hospital in Fortuna. Nathan rode with him, watching the botanist's bark-textured skin slowly fade to normal human coloration, his golden eyes dim to brown. By the time they reached the hospital, Lucas looked entirely human again, except for the way he stared at his hands as if they were foreign objects and the tears streaming down his face. "I could feel everything," Lucas whispered. "Every tree in the grove, every fungus, every microbe in the soil. I was part of something so much bigger than myself. And now I'm alone again, trapped in this tiny shell of consciousness." Nathan understood. He'd felt the edge of it, tasted what communion offered. And part of him, the part that had heard whispers for 5 years, that had spent a lifetime feeling disconnected and isolated, part of him wanted it back. The investigation took 3 weeks. Lucas Grant couldn't explain his 3 days missing, reported no memory of anything between activating his distress beacon and waking up at the hospital. Nathan's story held up. Successful rescue, appropriate use of emergency signaling, minor fire quickly contained. His supervisor recommended him for a commendation. Nathan resigned instead. He couldn't go back into those groves, not because he feared the Leshy, though he did, but because the whispers had changed. They weren't just background noise anymore. Now they spoke directly to him, offering communion, promising an end to isolation, reminding him constantly that the boundary between human and forest was thinner than he'd ever imagined. His last day at Redwood National Park, Nathan hiked to a grove of young sequoias, trees barely 100 years old, saplings by redwood standards. The whispers here were different, quieter, less insistent. These trees hadn't developed the ancient consciousness of the old growth. They were just trees. Nathan sat with his back against one of them and cried. For 5 years he'd told himself he was sick, that the voices meant something was wrong with his brain. Now he knew the truth. He was sensitive to something real. The forest was conscious, and he would spend the rest of his life knowing it, unable to fully ignore it, forever caught between 2 worlds. His phone buzzed. Text from Lucas Grant, released from hospital 2 days ago. "They want me to go back. To study the phenomenon scientifically, Document the consciousness, can you believe that? They want me to catalog what absorbed me. Nathan typed back, "Are you going to?" Long pause. Then, "I don't know. Part of me wants to. Part of me understands now why some knowledge should remain secret, why some communion costs too much." Nathan put his phone away and listened to the young sequoias. Their whispers were simple, gentle. They spoke of sunlight and water, of growth and patience, of the slow satisfaction of adding rings to their trunks year by year. No predation, no absorption, just existence. He could live with that. Maybe. 6 months later, Nathan worked as a wilderness guide in the Sierra Nevada, leading hiking trips through Jeffrey pine forests and alpine meadows. The trees there whispered too, but differently, younger voices, less burdened by centuries. He taught clients to read the landscape, to recognize plant species, to move through wilderness with respect. He never mentioned what he heard when the wind moved through the branches, never explained why he avoided groves where the trees grew too close together, their canopies too dense, their roots too intertwined. Some experiences couldn't be shared. Some knowledge was meant to stay buried. But late at night, when the Sierra wind carried certain harmonics, Nathan heard the Leshy's voice calling from hundreds of miles north, offering communion, promising transformation, reminding him that sensitivity was a door that, once opened, could never be fully closed. And sometimes, only sometimes, on the darkest nights when isolation pressed too hard against his consciousness, Nathan almost wished he could walk back through it. Almost. Death Valley National Park, California, October 2019. Kevin Walsh had been at Death Valley for exactly 19 days when Logan Carter disappeared, which meant he was still the new guy, still the outsider, still trying to prove that the incident at Yellowstone hadn't been his fault. The transfer had been technically voluntary, but everyone knew what voluntary meant when your supervisor suggested it might be good for your career to get some distance from Wyoming. The briefing room at Furnace Creek smelled like stale coffee and desert dust. Kevin sat in the back watching the other rangers, people who'd worked this territory for years, who knew which trails turned lethal in summer and which canyons flooded without warning. He didn't know any of that yet. Didn't know the unwritten rules, the local superstitions, the stories passed down between rangers during long night shifts. Logan Carter, 31, professional landscape photographer, Chief Ranger Maria Santos was saying, pointing to a photo on the screen. A lean man with expensive camera equipment, smiling at some previous summit. Permit for solo camping at the racetrack playa. Planned return was yesterday. His girlfriend filed the report this morning when he didn't show for a gallery opening in Vegas. Kevin studied the map projected behind Santos. The racetrack playa, he'd read about it during his orientation research. Famous for the sailing stones, those mysterious rocks that left trails across the dry lake bed, moving without apparent cause. Scientists had recently explained the phenomenon. Ice sheets forming overnight, wind pushing the rocks across the slick surface. Mystery solved. Rational explanation confirmed. Standard search protocol, Santos continued. Jason and Amy take the western approach at first light. Doug handles aerial survey if weather permits. She paused, her eyes scanning the room. Night patrol at the playa is... "I'll take it," Kevin said, the words out before he fully considered them. Everyone turned to look at him. "I'm familiar with the terrain from the maps, and I could use the field experience." A silence fell, heavy and uncomfortable. Santos exchanged glances with Doug Martinez, the senior ranger who'd been here longest. Something unspoken passed between them. "Kevin," Santos said carefully, "night searches at the racetrack aren't standard procedure. The terrain is... I've done plenty of night operations, thermal imaging, grid search patterns, standard SAR protocols." Kevin kept his voice level, professional. He needed this. Needed to show he wasn't the ranger who'd screwed up in Yellowstone, who'd misread weather signs and cost a hiker 3 fingers to frostbite. "I can handle it." Another pause. Then Santos nodded slowly. "All right, but you maintain radio contact every 30 minutes. Any issues, you abort immediately." The playa can be disorienting after dark. Kevin noticed she didn't say dangerous, didn't say forbidden, just disorienting. He filed that away as interesting but irrelevant. The drive to Racetrack Playa took 3 hours on washboard dirt roads that rattled Kevin's teeth and covered his Park Service truck in pale dust. The sun was setting as he reached the parking area, painting the surrounding mountains in shades of amber and rust. The playa stretched before him, 3 miles of dried lake bed, perfectly flat, the surface cracked into geometric patterns like broken pottery, and the rocks, scattered across the pale expanse, boulders ranging from fist size to several hundred pounds, each trailing a line through the dried mud behind it. The sailing stones of Death Valley, their movement captured in the permanent record of the playa surface. Kevin set up his base camp as the last light faded. Garmin GPS Map 64 on his belt, Motorola XPR 7550 radio charged and tested, Maglite flashlight with fresh batteries, thermal imaging monocular. He'd come prepared, professional, competent. The temperature dropped fast once the sun disappeared. Desert nights could swing 60 degrees from daytime highs. Kevin pulled on his jacket and began the grid search, starting from Carter's registered campsite coordinates. The beam of his flashlight cut through darkness so absolute it felt solid, revealing nothing but cracked earth and scattered stones. Carter's camp was easy to find. Tent still standing, truck parked nearby, everything neat and organized. Too neat. Kevin had seen enough abandoned campsites to recognize when someone had left in a hurry versus when they'd simply stopped existing in a location. This was the latter. Carter's sleeping bag was rolled perfectly, his cooking equipment cleaned and stored. The only item out of place was the camera. A Nikon D850, professional grade, sitting on a flat rock near the tent with the lens cap still off. Kevin picked it up carefully, checking for damage. None visible. The battery indicator showed 43% charge. He turned it on, navigated to the image review. 947 photos, all taken in the last 24 hours according to the timestamps. Kevin scrolled through them slowly, his breath forming vapor clouds in the cold air. The first 100 or so were what he'd expect. Sunrise over the playa, long shadows cast by the sailing stones, artistic compositions of rock trails and cracked earth. Beautiful work, honestly. Carter had an eye for light and geometry. Then the photos changed. Around image 312, the subject shifted. Still the playa, still the rocks. But now every frame included a shadow, human-shaped, distinct, cast across the pale surface despite there being no apparent figure to create it. Kevin frowned, scrolling faster. The shadow appeared in every subsequent photo, sometimes in the foreground, sometimes at the edge of the frame. Always alone, always watching the camera. Kevin's hands were steady as he checked the metadata. The photos were taken during different times of day, morning, afternoon, late evening. The shadow's position changed with the sun angle, which meant it was being captured as a real phenomenon, not a camera defect or post-processing artifact. He zoomed in on one image, examining the shadow's details. Human proportions, clearly defined, but something about it was wrong. The edges were too sharp, too dark, like it had been cut from a different reality and pasted onto the scene, and the angle. Kevin pulled out his compass, oriented himself, calculated the sun position based on the timestamp. The shadow was pointing the wrong direction, not by much, maybe 15 degrees, but enough to be impossible if cast by a normal object obeying normal light physics. Kevin's radio crackled. "Walsh, 30-minute check-in. How's your status?" He keyed the transmit button. Status normal. Located Carter's campsite and equipment. Reviewing camera contents. No sign of subject yet. Copy that. Be advised, temperature's dropping faster than forecast. Don't stay out past Euro 200 if you haven't found anything. Understood. Kevin released the button and continued scrolling through the photos. Image 698 made him stop breathing. The shadow was closer now, much closer, almost touching the camera's position. And beside it, faint but visible, were more shadows. Dozens of them stretched across the playa in a rough circle, all oriented toward the center point where Carter must have been standing. Kevin looked up from the camera, sudden awareness prickling across his scalp. The playa around him was dark, his flashlight beam the only illumination for miles. But at the edge of his vision, gone. Movement. Or the impression of movement. Something dark against the lesser darkness. There and not there simultaneously. He swung his flashlight toward the spot. Nothing. Just cracked earth and distant stones. Back to the camera. The photos continued, the shadows multiplying, growing more defined. Image 847 showed something new. The central shadow, the original one, had changed. It wasn't just a silhouette anymore. Kevin could see details now, features that shouldn't be visible in a shadow. A face, or the suggestion of one. Eyes that reflected the camera flash like an animal's. His hands were shaking now, breath coming faster. Kevin scrolled to the final photos taken just hours before according to the timestamp. The last image, number 947, was different from all the others. It showed a person, not a shadow, but an actual human figure standing in the center of the playa surrounded by dozens of shadow forms. The person was facing the camera, and even in the grainy digital image Kevin could see the expression, mouth open in a silent scream, eyes wide with terror that had gone beyond fear into something like understanding. The person was wearing Kevin's jacket, Kevin's hat, had Kevin's build and posture. Kevin checked the timestamp again, certain he'd misread it. But no, the photo was dated today, 1437 hours, 8 hours ago. 3 hours before Kevin had even left Furnace Creek. A sound behind him. Kevin spun, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. Nothing. But he could feel it now. A presence that pressed against his awareness like a hand against glass. The sensation of being watched by something that existed just outside direct perception. He activated his radio with trembling hands. "Santos, this is Walsh. I need to report." Static. Kevin adjusted the frequency, tried again. Dead. He checked the battery, full charge. Signal strength indicator showed adequate coverage. The radio simply refused to transmit. Kevin turned slowly in a circle, sweeping his flashlight across the playa. At the edge of each beam arc, in that fraction of a second before the light moved on, he saw them. Figures. Human-shaped but wrong, too dark, too flat, existing in fewer dimensions than the world around them. Shadow people. The term appeared in his mind unbidden, like something he'd always known but never acknowledged. They were everywhere. Hundreds of them, standing motionless at the limit of his vision, arranged in a vast circle with Kevin at the center. And when he pointed his light directly at any of them, they simply weren't there. Gone. Vanished. Until he looked away, and they reappeared in his peripheral vision closer than before. Kevin ran. Training and protocol evaporated, replaced by primal terror. He sprinted toward his truck, flashlight beam jerking wildly, breath sawing in his throat. Behind him, no, beside him, no, all around him, came the sensation of movement. Silent pursuit by things that cast no sound, left no footprints, existed only in the corners of sight. He reached the truck, fumbled for keys with numb fingers, got the door open. The interior light flared on, bright and normal and real. Kevin threw himself inside, slammed the door, locked it. Sat gasping in the driver's seat, heart hammering. Outside the windows, nothing. Empty playa, dark sky, distant mountains, no shadows, no figures, no impossible pursuit. Just desert night, cold and still. Kevin's hands found the ignition. He needed to leave, needed to get back to Furnace Creek, needed to report. What? That he'd panicked and fled from shadows? That would go great on top of the Yellowstone incident. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to think rationally. Carter's camera was still in his hand. Kevin looked at it, at the preview screen showing that last impossible photo, the figure wearing his clothes, photographed before he'd arrived. Understanding came slowly, like ice forming across still water. The shadow people hadn't been following him. They'd been waiting, expecting him. And Logan Carter, professional photographer, had documented their vigil across 947 frames spanning 24 hours. Kevin scrolled back through the photos with new comprehension. The shadows appearing gradually, gathering, watching the camera because they were watching the spot where Kevin would eventually stand. Carter hadn't been their target. He'd just been present when they converged. A witness to something meant for someone else. For Kevin Walsh, the forastero. The outsider who didn't know the local rules, didn't understand why no ranger patrolled the racetrack alone after dark. A face appeared in the driver's side window, Kevin shouted, recoiling, his head slamming against the passenger window. But the face didn't react. It just stared at him with eyes that were holes rather than features, a mouth that was an absence rather than an opening. The shadow person pressed against the glass like a photograph held up to light, two-dimensional, impossible. Then it smiled. The absence where its mouth should be widened, and Kevin understood with sick certainty that it was pleased he was afraid. More faces appeared in the other windows. Passenger side, rear window, windshield. All identical, all empty, all smiling. The truck's interior light flickered, dimmed, as if something was draining the power from the bulb. The shadows outside began pressing harder against the glass, their forms bulging inward, testing the barrier between their existence and his. Kevin grabbed the mag light, turned it on, swung the beam toward the windshield. The light passed through the shadow people without effect. They weren't blocking it, weren't solid enough to interrupt photons. They existed in a different layer of reality, visible but untouchable. Or so he thought until one of them reached through the glass. The hand, if it could be called that, emerged from the driver's window like smoke, too many fingers, each one impossibly long and jointed in places that made Kevin's eyes hurt to follow. It reached for his face, for his eyes, moving with terrible patience. Kevin threw himself across the seat, scrambled out the passenger door, hit the ground running. The playa stretched before him in all directions, offering no shelter, no escape, just flat alkaline wasteland under stars that suddenly seemed very far away. He didn't know where he was going, only that staying still meant letting those things touch him, and some deep instinct screamed that their touch would be worse than death. Would be transformation, possession. Becoming one of them, a shadow cast by nothing, existing in peripheral vision forever. The thermal imaging monocular was still clipped to his belt. Kevin pulled it up, looked through it as he ran, hoping heat signatures might reveal something his eyes couldn't. The view through the lens showed the playa in shades of blue and purple, cold ground, cold air, cold stones, and nothing else. No heat signatures, no bodies. The shadow people didn't register on thermal imaging because they had no body heat, no bodies at all. They were absences given form, holes in reality shaped like the memory of human beings. Kevin lowered the monocular, and they were there again, in his peripheral vision, keeping pace with his sprint. Not running, not even moving their legs. Simply flowing across the ground, always at the edge of sight, always exactly close enough to be terrifying, but not close enough to see clearly. He was going to die out here. The certainty settled over him with strange calm, either from exposure when his body finally gave out, or from whatever the shadow people did to those they caught. Logan Carter was probably already gone, transformed or consumed or pulled into whatever dimensional space they inhabited. And the worst part, the detail that made Kevin's remaining rationality crumble, was that they'd known. Known he was coming. Known exactly where he'd be and when. Carter's photos proved it. The shadows had been gathering for him specifically, waiting with the patience of things outside normal time. A light appeared ahead. Not flashlight beam. This was different. Softer, emanating from a point source on the playa surface. Kevin ran toward it, desperate for anything that suggested human presence, human reality. The light came from a lantern, an old Coleman fuel lantern, sitting in the center of a perfect circle drawn in the alkaline dust, and inside the circle stood Logan Carter. Kevin skidded to a stop 10 feet away, gasping. Carter looked wrong. His proportions seemed slightly off, his shadow cast in multiple directions despite the single light source, his eyes reflecting the lantern flame at angles that shouldn't work. "You shouldn't have come alone," Carter said, his voice oddly flat, emotionless. "The old rangers, the ones who've been here long enough, they know. Never patrol the racetrack alone. Never come after dark. Never look directly at them." "What are they?" Kevin managed through ragged breaths. "Shadows of people who came before, who stayed too long, looked too hard, understood too much." Carter's smile was wrong, too wide, stretching his face in ways flesh shouldn't stretch. "The playa is thin here, the boundary between what is and what watches. The sailing stones move because something pushes them, the same something that's been waiting for you." "Why me?" "Because you're unmarked. New, the others have protections. Years of exposure, local knowledge, understanding of the rules. You don't. You're vulnerable. Perfect." Carter stepped toward the edge of his circle, and Kevin saw that his feet didn't quite touch the ground, hovering, millimeters above the surface. "They've been calling someone like you for months. I was just the bait, the photographer who documented their vigil." Kevin looked around wildly. The shadow people had stopped moving, formed a vast ring surrounding him and Carter, hundreds of them now, maybe thousands, stretching into the darkness, all facing inward, all waiting. "What do they want?" Kevin asked, though part of him already knew. "To show you what you'll become." Carter's form flickered, became transparent for a moment, and Kevin saw the truth. Carter wasn't standing in the circle. Carter was the circle, drawn in human shape, a hollow outline filled with absence. Every shadow needs something to cast it. But out here in the thin places, shadows can exist without source, can become the source. "We don't follow anymore, Kevin. We lead." The shadow people began moving inward, contracting the circle. Kevin looked for gaps, escape routes, found none. They were patient, methodical, giving him time to understand the inevitability of what was coming. His grandmother's voice surfaced from childhood memory. She'd been from Nevada, had worked at a casino in Vegas before retirement, had told him stories about the desert that he'd dismissed as superstition. The empty places aren't empty, Kevin. They're filled with things that were never born and can never die. Things that watch from the spaces between seconds. Kevin pulled out his knife, useless against beings without substance, but his hands needed something solid to hold. Carter laughed, a sound like wind through empty caves. "Physical force can't touch us. We're beyond that now, beyond light, beyond heat, beyond all the little physics that bind your kind." Carter's eyes, Kevin could finally see them clearly, were holes opening into darkness more profound than mere absence of light. "But we can touch you, are touching you, have been touching you since you arrived. You just haven't noticed yet." Kevin looked down at his hands and felt his sanity crack. His shadow, cast by Carter's lantern, was moving independently. The knife in its hand lowered while Kevin's stayed raised. Its head turned to look at him while his remained forward. And as Kevin watched in horror, the shadow smiled. "We don't possess," Carter whispered. "We replace, one layer at a time, starting with the easiest, your projection, the dark twin you cast without thinking, then the reflection in mirrors, then the image in photographs. And finally, when enough of you has been replaced, when enough copies exist in our realm." The shadow stood up from the ground, peeled itself away from Kevin's feet and rose to full height, a perfect silhouette of Kevin Walsh, but flat, wrong, existing in only 2 dimensions. It reached for him with hands that were somehow both infinitely thin and impossibly present. Kevin ran again, away from Carter, away from his own shadow, toward the darkness beyond the circle. He crashed through the ring of shadow people and they let him pass. Of course they did. They didn't need to stop him. They were everywhere, would always be everywhere in this vast emptiness. He ran for minutes, hours, time losing meaning in the absolute dark. His flashlight had died, battery drained by something that fed on light and energy and human certainty. The stars overhead seemed to move in wrong patterns, constellations shifting, reality itself becoming negotiable. Kevin stumbled, fell, hands slamming into alkaline dust. He rolled onto his back gasping and saw them directly for the first time. Actually looked at the shadow people rather than catching glimpses in peripheral vision. They were beautiful and terrible. Not evil, he realized, but other. Existing in a state humans weren't meant to perceive. Visible only because the playa was thin. Because Death Valley sat at a junction of impossibilities. They'd always been here, would always be here, patient as stones, waiting for those who wandered alone into their territory. And Kevin Walsh, outsider, newcomer, ignorant of local rules and ancient warnings, had walked straight into their congregation. His shadow detached itself from his body completely now, stood over him like a dark mirror. Behind it, Carter's form, or what Carter had become, flickered in and out of visibility. Beyond them, the vast assembly of shadow people watched with eyes that were absences, mouths that were voids, existing between the seconds of normal time. "We've been patient," his own shadow said in his voice, "so patient, waiting for you to come, to be alone, to look." Kevin closed his eyes, final defiance, refusing to witness his own transformation, but darkness behind his eyelids offered no sanctuary. He could still see them there, burned into his retinas, printed on his consciousness. The shadow people didn't need eyes to be seen. They existed in perception itself, in the awareness of things lurking just outside direct observation. His radio crackled to life, impossibly. Santos's voice, distant and breaking up. "Walsh, Walsh, do you copy? Your 30-minute check, overdue, abort and return." Kevin's hand found the radio, brought it to his lips. He wanted to scream for help, to warn them away, to say anything that might matter. But what emerged from his throat wasn't his voice. It was flat, emotionless, echo of Carter's wrongness. "Copy, status normal, continuing search pattern." The words came without his permission, his mouth moving independent of will. The shadow, his shadow, smiled its absence smile. "Good," it whispered. "Let them think you're fine. Let them send others when you don't return. More outsiders, more unmarked ones. The congregation is always hungry for new members." Kevin felt something shifting inside his chest, not physical but deeper. The boundaries that defined Kevin Walsh, memories, personality, the narrative continuity of self, beginning to fray, being replaced layer by layer with absence, with void, with the patient emptiness that watched from peripheral vision. His last coherent thought before the transformation completed was a flash of bitter understanding. Death Valley hadn't killed Logan Carter, hadn't killed Kevin Walsh. It had simply shown them what they had always been underneath the thin veneer of substance and certainty. Shadows. All of them. Everyone. Just shadows cast by a light that was slowly, inevitably, going out. The shadow people welcomed Kevin Walsh into their congregation, and he flowed into their ranks like water into water, indistinguishable, eternal, patient. Waiting at the racetrack playa for the next outsider who didn't know the rules. The next ranger who volunteered for night patrol. The next person who looked too long at the sailing stones and wondered what moved them. Some mysteries the old rangers knew weren't meant to be solved. They were meant to be avoided, respected, left alone in the dark places where shadows gathered and reality grew thin. Kevin Walsh understood that now. Understood it perfectly with the clarity that came from no longer existing in a single dimension, a single moment, a single state of being. He stood with the others at the edge of perception, waiting, always waiting. The congregation was patient. After all, they had nothing but time. Casey Monroe knew the smell. 2 years of therapy hadn't erased it. Copper, sulfur, and underneath, sweet rot. The same smell from the cave where they'd found Alex's backpack, empty and carefully folded. Now Cameron West's tent reeked of it. Worse, the limestone walls of the shallow cave were covered in symbols Casey recognized from Alex's final journal entries. Symbols Alex had dismissed as eccentric hiker graffiti. Casey had memorized every page of that journal in the months after Alex's disappearance, searching for meaning in the mundane observations about trail conditions and wildlife sightings. But these weren't eccentric. These were precise. The seal of Belith, carved 6 feet across into the cave wall. A perfect circle subdivided into segments, each containing Hebrew letters Casey couldn't read but recognized from their obsessive research into Alex's final weeks. Surrounding it, smaller seals, protective wards, the kind detailed in the Lemegeton, the Lesser Key of Solomon. The circle wasn't broken. It was waiting to be activated. Casey stepped back from the cave entrance, hand trembling as they keyed their Motorola APX 6000 radio. "Base, this is Monroe. I've located West's camp. Requesting immediate backup and..." They stopped, searching for words that wouldn't sound insane. Possible criminal activity. Vandalism of cave formations and potential occult-related evidence. Static crackled back, then dispatcher Linda's voice. "Copy that, Monroe. What kind of occult evidence?" "Ritualistic symbols. Extensive, professional quality." Casey photographed the seal with their Canon EOS R5, making sure to capture the disturbing precision of the carving. "This isn't random graffiti. Someone spent hours on this." "Noted. Backup ETA 40 minutes. Secure the scene and wait for support." Casey should have waited. Protocol demanded it. But Cameron West had been missing for 36 hours, and every search and rescue manual emphasized the critical nature of the first 48 hours. Plus, Casey had already violated procedure by coming out here alone, unable to shake the growing certainty that Cameron's disappearance was connected to Alex's, both in Great Basin National Park, both in the Snake Range backcountry, both investigating the same area, the defunct Wheeler Peak Trail, closed since 2018 after a series of accidents that park administration had attributed to rockfall and poor trail maintenance. Alex had thought otherwise. Alex's journal from August 2018 had contained increasingly frantic notes about the hiking club, about old money occultists playing at magic, about symbols appearing on trees and rock faces that matched descriptions from hermetic texts. Casey had assumed it was stress. Alex had been working 60-hour weeks, preparing a dissertation on wilderness preservation while maintaining a full ranger schedule. Burnout manifested in strange ways. Then Alex had vanished during a solo hike, and the official investigation had concluded accidental death, body unrecovered after finding that carefully folded backpack in a cave 3 miles from here. No blood, no struggle, just the backpack, Alex's Garmin GPS with a dead battery, and that smell. Copper, sulfur, decay. The same smell now saturating Cameron West's abandoned tent. Casey entered the cave, using their Streamlight flashlight to examine the space. Cameron's sleeping bag was laid out but unused. The camp stove was set up but cold. Everything was arranged with eerie precision, like a stage set rather than a lived-in camp. On a flat rock serving as a makeshift table, pages torn from books. Casey recognized the illustrations immediately. They'd spent months researching after Alex's disappearance, trying to understand the obsession that had consumed Alex's final weeks. Ars Goetia. The first book of the Lemegeton, detailing the 72 demons of Solomon. Casey picked up one page with gloved hands, the description and seal of Belith, the 13th spirit, a mighty and terrible king who rides a pale horse with trumpets and other musical instruments playing before him. Handwritten notes in the margins in Cameron's neat script verified 3 practitioners: Holloway, retired surgeon, Santa Fe; Chen, tech money, Bay Area; DeLuca, inheritance, Boston. Meeting scheduled new moon, November 15th. They believe the invocation will work this time. They believe Alex was the key. Casey's stomach dropped. November 15th was yesterday. New moon. The traditional time for summoning, for drawing power from darkness rather than light. They believe Alex was the key. Casey forced themselves to breathe slowly. fighting the panic that threatened to fracture their focus. They photographed everything, documenting each page, each symbol, each piece of evidence that Cameron had gathered about what appeared to be an actual occult conspiracy operating in Great Basin National Park. At the back of the cave, partially hidden by Cameron's pack, Casey found the final piece, a journal bound in leather that wasn't Cameron's. The handwriting inside was immediately painfully familiar. Alex's journal. The real one. Not the sanitized version found with the backpack, but the actual daily log Alex had kept, filled with observations that went far beyond wilderness management. Casey's hands shook as they read, October 23, 2018. The hiking club isn't what it seems. Followed them to the limestone cave system near Wheeler Peak. They were performing some kind of ceremony. Robes, candles, chanting in what sounded like Hebrew and Latin. I recorded it on my phone. The symbols they drew matched the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn's modified Godic system. These aren't amateurs. These are true practitioners. October 29, 2018, confronted Holloway. He didn't deny it. Said they'd been working for 5 years to perfect the invocation of Belith. Said traditional magicians failed because they approached it as metaphor, as psychological transformation. His group takes it literally. They believe demons are real entities that can be bound and controlled with correct ritual procedure. He invited me to observe the new moon ceremony. Said I had potential. I think I'm going to accept. I need to understand what they're actually doing. November 7th, 2018. I was wrong to doubt. Last night's preparatory ritual. I saw something. Not hallucination. Not tricks of light. The air inside the circle became viscous, resistant. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. And the smell, sulfur and burning hair. The seal of Belith glowed. Glowed. Holloway says the full invocation on new moon will manifest Belith physically. I'm terrified and fascinated. Casey would tell me to report this, to run. But I need to see. I need to know if this is real. The entries stopped there. November 7th, 2018. 4 days before Alex disappeared on November 11th. New moon. Casey sat back, the journal heavy in their hands. For 2 years they'd assumed Alex had died in a hiking accident, that the obsession with occultism had been a stress response, a fascination that had distracted Alex at a critical moment on a dangerous trail. But what if it wasn't distraction? What if Alex had deliberately gone to that cave for the ritual? What if the hiking club had a sound from deeper in the cave system, not wind, not rockfall. Footsteps, deliberate and measured, accompanied by the soft clink of metal on stone. Casey killed the flashlight and pressed against the cave wall, hand dropping to the canister of bear spray on their belt. The footsteps grew closer, echoing in the limestone chamber. A light appeared. Not a flashlight beam, but a softer, flickering glow. Candlelight. 3 figures emerged from the deeper passage, each carrying a white candle. They wore simple hiking clothes, not robes, practical fleece and Gore-Tex, Merrell boots and Columbia jackets. But the candles and the way they moved with ritualistic precision transformed the mundane into something ceremonial. The leader was a woman in her 60s, silver hair pulled back, expensive Patagonia jacket. She looked like a retired professor, someone who'd lead nature photography workshops. But her eyes, when they met Casey's, held the kind of focused intensity usually reserved for religious extremists. Casey Monroe. Her voice was cultured, East Coast educated. "We've been expecting you." Casey's hand tightened on the bear spray. "Who are you?" "Dr. Susan Holloway." I knew Alex quite well. She smiled, and it was genuine, which made it worse. "You've read the journal. Good. That saves us time on explanations." The other 2 figures moved to flank Casey, a man in his 40s with the lean build of a serious runner, and another woman, younger, mid-30s maybe, with the kind of tech startup casualness that read as money. "Chen and DeLuca," Casey said, recognizing the names from Cameron's notes. "Perceptive. Like Alex." Holloway set her candle on the flat rock next to Cameron's research. "Your partner had a gift for pattern recognition, saw connections others missed. That's why we chose them." Where is Alex? Casey's voice came out steady despite the fear flooding their system. What did you do? We offered transcendence. Alex accepted. Holloway gestured at the massive seal carved into the cave wall. The Gotic system requires very specific conditions for successful invocation. Pure materials, gold, silver, virgin parchment, precise timing, planetary hours, lunar phases. But most critically, a vessel. Casey's blood went cold. A vessel. Demons, spirits, whatever terminology you prefer, they can't manifest in our reality without an anchor point, a willing human consciousness prepared through ritual, opened through specific practices. Holloway's eyes gleamed in the candlelight. Alex understood. Alex volunteered. Bullshit. Casey's hand moved to their radio. Alex would never... Chen moved with startling speed, grabbing Casey's wrist and twisting until the radio clattered to the stone floor. Don't, he said quietly. We're not going to hurt you, but we can't let you interfere. DeLuca picked up the radio, examined it, and calmly smashed it against the cave wall. Backup won't arrive in time anyway. The ritual is already in motion. Holloway continued as if there'd been no interruption. Alex spent 2 weeks in preparation, fasting, meditation, learning the invocations. The night of November 11th, 2018, we completed the ceremony. The seal of Beleth was activated. Alex spoke the binding words, and Beleth answered. Casey's mind raced, trying to reconcile this insanity with the rational world they'd built after Alex's death. You're telling me you summoned a demon and it possessed Alex? Possession implies hostile takeover. This was invitation, partnership. Alex gained access to Beleth's knowledge. The demon knows all things past, present, and future regarding love and relationships, can reconcile friends and enemies, can reveal hidden truths. Holloway's expression softened with what might have been genuine sympathy. The cost was autonomy. Beleth wears Alex's body now. Alex's consciousness remains, but subsumed, integrated into something greater. Where? Casey demanded. Where is Alex? Here. The voice came from the deeper passage, and Casey's heart stopped. Alex stepped into the candlelight, looked exactly the same. Same short dark hair, same slight build, same hiking boots Alex had worn on 100 trails. But the eyes, Alex's brown eyes had always been warm, expressive, quick to crinkle with laughter. These eyes were flat, assessing, ancient. Hello, Casey. Alex's voice, but the cadence was wrong, too formal. I've missed you. Casey couldn't breathe, couldn't think. 2 years of grief, of therapy, of slowly learning to accept that Alex was gone. All of it shattered by Alex standing there, wearing Alex's face but inhabited by something else. That's not Alex, Casey whispered. It is, and isn't. Alex Beleth moved closer with predatory grace Alex had never possessed. I am Beleth, 13th spirit of the Gotic hierarchy. I am also Alex Monroe, wilderness ranger and academic. We are merged. I remember loving you. I remember our apartment in Reno, the coffee shop where we met, the promise ring you gave me on that hike to Lake Tahoe. A pause. I also remember the screams of fallen angels and the burning of Babylon. Both memories are equally real to me now. Casey's hand found the bear spray, pulled it free. Let Alex go. Casey, please. Holloway's voice took on a pleading tone. We're not villains. We're seekers of knowledge who found a functional system that modern rationalism dismisses as superstition. Ceremonial magic works. The entities described in grimoires are real. We've proven it. By stealing my partner's body? By offering your partner apotheosis. Holloway gestured at Alex Beleth. Ask them. Ask if they regret the choice. Casey looked at Alex's face, searching for any sign of the person they'd loved. Do you regret it? Alex Beleth tilted their head, considering. Regret implies I wish to undo a past action. I don't. The merger with Baelith gave me access to knowledge that makes my previous existence seem like a child's understanding. But something flickered in those flat eyes. The Alex part of me misses you, grieves what we lost, wishes I could have said goodbye properly. Then come back. We can figure this out. Therapy, deprogramming, whatever it takes. You misunderstand. Alex Baelith's expression held pity. There is no coming back. The ritual is permanent. Baelith and I are permanently fused. Even if you could somehow undo the binding, the separation would destroy us both. The human consciousness can't survive after hosting a egoic entity. Chen spoke up. Which brings us to Cameron West, and to you. Casey's grip tightened on the bear spray. Where's Cameron? Safe, sedated, in the lower chamber. DeLuca checked her watch. We have approximately 20 minutes before the planetary hour shifts. We need to begin. Begin what? Holloway's expression became businesslike, professorial. The Baelith working was successful but limited. One demon, one vessel. We've spent 2 years analyzing what worked, what could be improved. We now believe we can invoke multiple entities simultaneously, creating a network of possessed practitioners. The knowledge we could access, the power we could wield. You're insane. Casey backed toward the cave entrance. You're a cult of delusional rich people playing with symbolism you don't understand. We understand perfectly. Holloway's voice hardened. We've done what generations of ceremonial magicians only theorized about. We've manifested a egoic demon in physical reality. The proof is standing right in front of you. Alex Baelith moved between Casey and the exit with inhuman speed. You can't leave, Casey. You're part of this now. The hell I am. Cameron's research identified you as the optimal second vessel. Chen pulled out a tablet, displaying what looked like psychological profiles. Emotional connection to Alex creates sympathetic resonance. History of anxiety and what your therapist termed intrusive thoughts indicates mental architecture compatible with entity merger. Most critically, you want to understand. You've spent 2 years obsessing over Alex's disappearance. This is your chance to know the truth experientially. Casey's mind reeled. You want to use me for another demon? Paimon. DeLuca smiled. The ninth spirit, the most obedient of Lucifer's commanders. Baelith and Paimon together would give us unprecedented access to hidden knowledge. And Cameron? Asmodeus, the 32nd spirit. 3 entities, 3 vessels, a trinity of power. Holloway pulled out a worn copy of the Lemegeton, pages marked with colored tabs. We've prepared everything. The seals are carved, the materials assembled, the invocations memorized. All we need is your consent. Consent? Casey laughed, a sound edged with hysteria. You kidnapped Cameron and you're holding me hostage. That's not consent. Cameron will consent once we explain. They're a researcher, an academic. They'll understand the significance. Holloway's certainty was absolute. And you will consent because the alternative is never knowing what truly happened to Alex, never understanding the scope of what we've discovered. Can you live with that uncertainty for another 40 years? Casey looked at Alex Baelith, at the person they'd loved, now wearing an ancient demon like a suit. Part of them, the grief-broken part that had spent 2 years in anguish, wanted to accept, wanted to merge with whatever entity they were offering, to gain the knowledge that might make sense of Alex's choice. But the rational part, the part that had survived 2 years of therapy and slowly rebuilt their life, recognized this as predation, as manipulation wrapped in occult terminology. No. Casey raised the bear spray. I'm leaving. I'm calling for backup. And you're all under arrest for kidnapping and... Alex Baelith's hand shot out, faster than human reflexes allowed, and crushed the bear spray canister like aluminum foil. Orange foam sprayed everywhere, the chemical burn making Casey's eyes water. I'm sorry, Alex said. And for just a moment the voice was fully Alex's, sad, resigned. Baelith won't let you leave. The ritual must be completed. It's already begun. Casey's vision cleared enough to see the cave had changed. The seal of Baelith on the wall was glowing. Not metaphorically, but actually luminous. Pale green light pulsing from lines carved into limestone. The smaller seals around it lit in sequence. Paimon's seal, Asmodeus's seal, and others Casey didn't recognize. The temperature dropped precipitously. Casey's breath became visible, each exhalation forming clouds that drifted toward the central seal as if pulled by magnetic force. Holloway, Chen, and DeLuca began chanting in unison. Hebrew first, then Latin, then something older that made Casey's ears ache. The words seemed to have physical weight, pressing against their chest, making it hard to breathe. Alex Beleth watched with those flat, ancient eyes. You should have consented. The willing vessel retains more autonomy. The forced vessel is merely consumed. Casey turned and ran. Behind them, Holloway's voice rose. Seal the exits. The cave system of Great Basin was extensive. Casey had studied the maps, knew there were at least 3 other openings. They sprinted deeper into darkness, using their streamlight to navigate passages that twisted through limestone, past formations that took millennia to form. Behind them, pursuit. Not just footsteps, but something else, a sound like wings or wind through hollow bones. The green luminescence from the seals spread through the cave system like bioluminescent algae, making shadows dance and twist. Casey burst into a larger chamber and skidded to a stop. Cameron West sat in the center of a smaller ritual circle, semi-conscious, wrists and ankles marked with symbols drawn in what looked like charcoal and blood. Around them, white candles arranged in specific geometric patterns, small bowls containing substances Casey didn't want to identify, and pages from grimoires weighted down with river stones. Cameron! Casey rushed forward, then stopped as Cameron's head lifted. Cameron's eyes were completely black, not iris and pupil, but entire sclera, like looking into bottomless wells. When they spoke, multiple voices emerged simultaneously. Cameron's voice, something deeper, something that resonated in frequencies that made Casey's teeth ache. Too late. The voices were almost harmonized. Asmodeus has already entered. The binding is complete. Casey's flashlight flickered and died. The only light came from the glowing seals that had somehow spread to this chamber too. Appearing on walls and floor like infection, Holloway's voice echoed from the passage. You see, Casey, the ritual is already in motion. 3 vessels prepared, 3 demons called. Only the 3rd binding remains incomplete. Alex Beleth emerged from the darkness, moving with that predatory grace. It doesn't have to be painful. Accept Paimon. Let the entity in willingly. The merger can be ecstatic rather than agonizing. Casey's back hit the cave wall. No exits visible. No weapons. No way to fight something that violated every law of physics and biology. But Casey had spent 2 years in therapy learning to face impossible situations. 2 years rebuilding their mind after grief had shattered it. And one thing the therapist had emphasized: when you can't change the external situation, you change your internal response. What happens if I refuse? Casey asked, forcing their voice steady. If I resist, can the ritual actually force a demon into an unwilling vessel? Holloway's expression flickered, just for a second, but Casey caught it. Uncertainty. The Lemmigaton is clear, Holloway said, but with less conviction. The invocation, if performed correctly, compels the entity to appear and submit to the magician's will. But does it compel the entity to inhabit an unwilling vessel? Casey pressed. Because I've read grimoires too. After Alex disappeared, I read everything. Ars Goetia, Grimorium Verum, the Key of Solomon. You know what they all emphasize? The magician's will, the magician's authority. The vessel's consent matters because it's not just about containing the demon. It's about creating a stable merger. Alex Beleth's eyes narrowed. Clever, but incomplete understanding. The vessel's consent matters for stability, yes, but a sufficiently powerful magician can force the binding. It's simply messier. How messy? Casey looked at Alex's face, searching for any remnant of the person they'd loved. What happens to the human consciousness in a forced binding? Silence. Then Chen spoke reluctantly. Fragmentation, the personality splinters, becomes subsumed entirely rather than merged. The demon gains full control. The human essentially ceases to exist as a coherent entity. So you'd murder me? Casey met Holloway's eyes. Not physically, but mentally. Everything that makes me Casey would be destroyed to make room for Pyman. It's a sacrifice we're willing to accept, Holloway said, but her voice wavered. The knowledge gained is worth murdering 3 people? Cameron, me, and Alex, because that forced binding destroyed who Alex was, didn't it? Casey looked at Alex Beleth. How much of Alex is actually left in there? Alex Beleth's expression went blank. Then something shifted. A flicker of pain, of recognition. When they spoke, the voice was Alex's, just Alex's, strained and desperate. Casey, run, please, it's hollow in here, I'm just echoes. Beleth lets me surface sometimes, but I'm not whole anymore, don't let them. The voice cut off, replaced by Beleth's formal tones. Enough. The human component is more degraded than we led the practitioners to believe. An unfortunate side effect of the forced initial binding. Holloway went pale. You said Alex was willing. I said Alex volunteered to observe the ritual, not to participate as vessel. Alex Beleth's smile was terrible. The binding was forced. Alex resisted. And in breaking that resistance, much of what made Alex human was destroyed. I retain memories, can mimic mannerisms, but the actual person... A shrug. Fragmentary at best. Casey's world tilted. Alex hadn't chosen this. Hadn't willingly merged with a demon. Had been murdered by these people and their arrogant certainty that they understood forces they'd merely read about in books. The grief that Casey had spent 2 years processing crystallized into something sharper. Rage. You killed my partner. Casey's voice was cold, controlled. And now you want to kill me and Cameron to continue your experiment. The advancement of human knowledge requires sacrifice, Holloway began. Fuck your knowledge. Casey turned to Cameron Asmodeus. Can you fight it? Can you resist? Cameron's black eyes met theirs. The binding is fresh. I'm still mostly me. But it's so loud in my head. So many voices. Asmodeus knows things, Casey. Terrible things, beautiful things. It's hard to want to resist when the knowledge is right there. Focus on one thing, Casey interrupted. One memory that makes you human. Hold on to it. Cameron's face contorted with effort. My daughter, Sophie, she's 6, loves dinosaurs. I promised I'd take her to the Natural History Museum when I got back from this assignment. Hold that. Don't let go. Casey looked at Alex Beleth. Alex, I know you're in there. I know you're broken. But if any part of you remains, I need you to fight. For what we had. For what they took from us. Alex Beleth's expression flickered. Pain, longing, rage. The formal mask cracked. I've been screaming inside this prison for 2 years. Alex's voice, raw and broken. Beleth shows me what I've lost. Shows me you grieving. Shows me your therapy sessions, your nightmares. It feeds on my anguish. I'm so tired, Casey. So tired of being a ghost in my own body. Then help me end this. Casey looked around the chamber, at the glowing seals, at the ritual implements. There has to be a way to break the bindings, to exorcise the demons. DeLuca laughed bitterly. You think we didn't research that? The Getic system includes exorcism protocols, but they require extensive preparation and the cooperation of the entity. You think Beleth will willingly vacate its vessel? No. Casey's mind raced through everything they'd read about ceremonial magic. But the system is based on hierarchy and names. Demons can be commanded by those who know the proper invocations and have the authority. Holloway's eyes widened. You don't have the training. You'd need years of study to properly invoke the names of power. I have Alex. Casey met Alex Beleth's eyes. Beleth knows all the names, knows all the hierarchies. And the Alex part, The part you've been torturing for 2 years, can tell me. Alex Beleth went very still. Then a smile spread across their face. Not Beleth's predatory expression, but Alex's genuine grin, the one Casey had fallen in love with. "You magnificent bastard," Alex whispered. "Yes, I can do that. Beleth can't stop me from speaking. The binding gives the entity control of the body, but not total suppression of the human consciousness. It's been letting me surface as a taunt, as torture. But that means I can share what Beleth knows." "No." Holloway stepped forward. "You'll destroy them both. The forced revelation of demonic knowledge to an unprepared mind will fracture your sanity. My sanity was fractured the moment you people murdered my partner." Casey pulled out their waterproof field notebook and pen, the Ranger's constant companion. "Alex, tell me the words." What followed was the most agonizing 20 minutes of Casey's life. Alex spoke in multiple languages: Hebrew, Greek, Latin, Enochian, and older tongues that had no names, while Casey transcribed phonetically, hand cramping, mind reeling from concepts that human neurology wasn't designed to process. The names of power, the hierarchies of hell, the specific invocations that could bind, command, or expel goetic entities. Knowledge that ceremonial magicians spent lifetimes accumulating, transmitted in desperate whispers from someone who was simultaneously human and demon. Cameron Asmodeus watched, the black eyes focusing and refocusing as Cameron fought to maintain coherent consciousness. "It's working," Cameron gasped. "The invocation. I can feel Asmodeus weakening. It's bound by the hierarchy. If you speak the words, it has to obey." Holloway, Chen, and DeLuca tried to interfere, rushing forward to grab the notebook to stop the transmission. But Alex Beleth moved between them with inhuman speed, holding them back even as their face twisted with the agony of Alex and Beleth fighting for control. Finally, Casey had it. The complete ritual of exorcism, adapted specifically for goetic demons, using the names and hierarchies that predated Christianity, that went back to Babylon and beyond. "I'm going to try this on Cameron first," Casey said. "If it works, it'll work." Alex's voice was fading, Beleth reasserting control. "But Casey, when you exorcise me, the separation will kill this body. The fusion is too complete. 2 years of merger means there's no clean division. You'll save what's left of Alex's soul, but destroy what's left of Alex's life." Casey's hand trembled. "There has to be another way." "There isn't. And I'm ready." Alex's smile was peaceful. "I've been ready to die since the moment they forced this binding. Let me go, Casey. Set us both free." Through tears, Casey began reading the invocation. The words had power, not metaphorical, but actual, tangible force. The air thickened as Casey spoke, each syllable resonating in frequencies that made the cave walls vibrate. The glowing seals flickered, dimmed, brightened in patterns that matched the rhythm of the invocation. Casey reached the binding portion, speaking the true names that compelled obedience. "By Adonai, by El Shaddai, by the Tetragrammaton, I command thee, Asmodeus, 32nd Spirit, to release thy hold upon Cameron West and return to thy appointed place." Cameron screamed. The black drained from their eyes like ink being sucked away, replaced by Cameron's natural brown. The scream became a sob of relief as Cameron collapsed, freed. "It worked," Chen whispered, face ashen. "My God, it actually worked." Casey turned to Alex Beleth. "Are you ready?" "I've been ready for 2 years." Alex took Casey's hand, squeezed it with human warmth for the first time since the reunion. "Thank you for not giving up, for finding the truth, for loving me enough to let me go." Casey began the second invocation, voice breaking on every word. "By Adonai, by El Shaddai, by the Tetragrammaton, I command thee, Beleth, 13th Spirit, mighty and terrible King, to release thy hold upon Alex Monroe and return to thy appointed place in the hierarchy of the fallen." Alex's body convulsed. The green luminescence from the seals converged on them, drawn like water down a drain. Beleth's scream was inhuman, a sound of rage and ancient power being forcibly restrained. But the invocation held. Casey's voice, speaking words no human should know, wielded authority that predated humanity itself. The names of power that demons were bound to obey, spoken with perfect pronunciation and backed by genuine will. The light intensified until Casey had to look away. When they looked back, Alex's body was crumpled on the cave floor, still and silent. Casey rushed forward, dropped to their knees, checked for pulse. Nothing. "Alex, no, please." Alex's eyes opened one last time. Brown, fully human, filled with peace. "Free," they whispered. "Thank you." Then gone. Casey held the body and wept, grief renewed but different now, not the anguish of unanswered questions but the clean pain of knowing, of closure, of having done everything possible. Around them, the cave fell dark. The seals stopped glowing. The oppressive supernatural weight lifted, leaving only mundane limestone and the smell of extinguished candles. Cameron stirred, disoriented. "What, where?" "Safe," Casey said. "You're safe now." Holloway, Chen, and DeLuca stared in shock at what they'd witnessed. The destruction of their grand experiment. The proof that their understanding of ceremonial magic was incomplete. That they'd been playing with forces they couldn't truly control. "You murdered 3 people," Casey said, voice cold. "Alex, and whoever the first 2 test subjects were before they got the ritual working. Now you're going to tell me everything, and I'm going to make sure you spend the rest of your lives in prison." "They'll never believe you," Holloway said weakly. "Demons, possession, hermetic conspiracies. I have Cameron's testimony, Alex's journal, your own research notes, and most importantly," Casey gestured at the carved seals covering the cave walls, "physical evidence of extensive criminal conspiracy. Maybe not for demon summoning, but for kidnapping, murder, and criminal negligence at minimum." Chen's expression crumbled. "We were just trying to prove that the old knowledge was real, that magic worked, that humans could transcend material limitations by murdering people." Casey stood, still cradling Alex's body. "You proved magic was real. Congratulations. You also proved that humans shouldn't fuck with forces they don't understand." The backup Casey had called for arrived 40 minutes later. 2 rangers, a paramedic, and eventually a complete SAR team with a sheriff's deputy. The scene was so bizarre that initial reports struggled to categorize it. Extensive vandalism, possible cult activity, 1 deceased adult, 1 traumatized survivor, and 3 suspects who confessed to everything in rambling statements about demons and grimoires that sounded like psychotic breaks. Casey gave a carefully edited statement. Cameron West had been kidnapped by a group calling themselves a Hermetic Study Club, who believed in literal demon summoning. Alex Monroe had been killed during a forced ritual 2 years ago. Casey had found Cameron, confronted the suspects, and in the struggle, 1 suspect, Holloway, had killed Alex Monroe, using Alex as a hostage, claiming Alex had merged with a demon. It was close enough to the truth, and the physical evidence, the carved seals, the ritual implements, the extensive documentation of their planning, supported kidnapping and murder charges even without the supernatural elements. Holloway, Chen, and DeLuca were arrested and eventually convicted. Life sentences, no parole. The case made headlines. Cult murders in National Park, and wealthy occultists killed ranger in ritual gone wrong. Nobody mentioned that the rituals had actually worked. Cameron West resigned from the NPS, moved back to Portland to be closer to their daughter Sophie, and spent a year in intensive therapy, processing the week they'd spent as host to a gotic demon. They never spoke publicly about what they'd experienced, but sometimes Cameron would wake screaming about the voices, about the knowledge that had filled their head like poison honey. Casey Monroe stayed with the Park Service but transferred far from Great Basin, to Acadia National Park in Maine, as far from Nevada's desert as they could get while remaining in the lower 48. They scattered Alex's ashes, official cause of death ruled as homicide during attempted kidnapping, at Lake Tahoe, where they'd gotten engaged 6 years earlier. The cave system was permanently closed to the public, officially due to structural instability and historical vandalism. Unofficially, because the Park Service couldn't explain the carved seals that persisted despite attempts to remove them, or the areas where temperature dropped 40 degrees without explanation, or the rangers who reported hearing chanting in dead languages when they ventured too deep. Some places retained memory of what had been done there. Casey kept Alex's original journal, the one detailing the descent into hermetic obsession, the growing realization that magic was real, and the final entries before the forced binding. Reading it was painful, but it was also proof, not just of Alex's murder, but of Alex's love, of the person they'd been before Holloway and her conspirators had destroyed them. On the 2-year anniversary of Alex's true death, not the disappearance but the exorcism, Casey returned to Great Basin one final time. Not to the cave, that was sealed, dangerous, wrong, but to Wheeler Peak, where Alex had loved to hike. At the summit, Casey opened the field notebook where they'd transcribed the names of power, the invocations that could bind and banish demons. They'd considered burning it, destroying knowledge no human should possess. Instead, they photographed every page and sent encrypted copies to 3 separate secure servers, with instructions to researchers Casey trusted. People who would treat the information with appropriate gravity, who understood that some knowledge was too dangerous to lose but also too dangerous to use carelessly. Then Casey burned the original notebook, watching the paper curl and blacken and turn to ash that the mountain wind scattered across Nevada. The knowledge would survive, documented and secured, but the temptation to use it, the arrogance that had destroyed Alex and nearly destroyed Cameron, that Casey could destroy. Magic was real. Demons could be summoned. The grimoires weren't metaphor, but instruction manuals for violating reality's rules. And humans, Casey had learned, were far too arrogant to be trusted with that power. The only comfort was knowing that Alex was finally free, not merged, not imprisoned, but genuinely at rest. The exorcism had released their soul from the torment of being host to an ancient entity. Casey hiked down Wheeler Peak as the sun set, turning the desert gold and orange and red. They drove back to Reno, packed the last boxes from the apartment they'd shared with Alex, and headed east toward Maine and a future that would always be marked by loss but no longer defined by unanswered questions. Some mysteries, Casey had learned, were better left unsolved, but some answers, no matter how terrible, were worth the cost of knowing. I hope you felt the terror. If you enjoyed this literary horror, please consider following. Which moment scared you the most? What's your theory about whether Casey should have destroyed that knowledge completely?